October 3rd, 2002, Wheaton, Maryland. Maybe 7:41 in the morning, probably right in that rush hour window where everyone's already running late and nobody's paying attention to anything except the road in front of them and whatever's in their coffee cup. James Martin is walking across a parking lot. 55 years old, program analyst, probably thinking about his day, maybe about nothing at all, basically doing what people do when they're moving from point A to point B and the brain is just idling along on autopilot. He doesn't make it to point B. Within the next 90 minutes, 4 more people are gone. A landscaper mowing a lawn in Rockville, maybe halfway through his morning route, probably not thinking about anything except the grass. A cab driver sitting outside a post office in White Flint, basically just waiting for a fare. A nanny crossing a parking lot in Kensington. A delivery driver in Olney. 5 people, 5 different locations, all within a few miles of each other, maybe 20 minutes apart. And nobody can figure out where it's coming from because there's no pattern, no face, no description, basically nothing except a sound and then someone on the ground and everyone around them running in different directions because they don't know which direction is safe. By the end of that day, something has shifted. Gas stations start putting up blue tarps so people can fill their tanks without being visible from the road. Maybe a plastic sheet between them and whatever's out there, probably not enough, but it's something. Parents stand over their kids at bus stops and move in zigzag patterns. I mean grown adults zigzagging across parking lots because they read somewhere that made you harder to target. Grocery stores empty out, restaurant patios close. People who've lived in these suburbs for 30 years start looking at tree lines, at rooftops, at the windows of passing cars in a way they've never looked before. For 23 days, 2 people turned the most powerful city in the world into a place where nobody felt safe pumping gas. One was a 41-year-old military veteran with an expert precision badge and a plan that had been years in the making. The other was 17 years old. Let's start from the beginning. Before we begin you up, good. Forget the noise outside for a second. Leave the cars, the sirens, and the stress at the door. Tonight, these stories will unfold slowly and respectfully, accompanied by gentle rain and subtle atmospheric visuals to create a calm space. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what city you're in and what time it is there. And hit subscribe so we can stick together in the dark. We tell these dark stories not for entertainment or spectacle, and without any dramatization. We share them as a poignant reminder of the real people and real lives that were lost, and perhaps to help us recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, lower your volume just a bit, enough to let the rain gently carry you off to sleep. Lights off? Okay, good. Take a breath, a real one. Let's go back. Way back. To understand what happened in those 23 days, you have to understand the 2 people who made it happen. And to understand those 2 people, you have to start somewhere that seems completely unrelated to a military base in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, maybe around 1979, probably during one of those hot summers where the humidity sits on your chest and doesn't move. John Allen Muhammad was born on December 31st, 1960, in Baton Rouge. His mother passed away when he was 3 years old, maybe from illness. I don't know the exact circumstances, basically just gone, and he was raised by relatives after that. His father wasn't in the picture. maybe never was. Probably one of those absences that shapes everything that comes after without ever getting explained. By most accounts, he was a quiet kid, maybe introverted, probably not someone who stood out in any particular way. He joined the Louisiana Army National Guard at 17, then transferred to the regular Army in 1985, became a mechanic and truck driver and metal worker, and here's the detail that matters most for everything that comes later. He qualified with his standard issue equipment and earned the Expert Precision Badge, the Army's highest accuracy rating. He was genuinely, professionally exceptional at this one specific thing. He could hit a specific mark exactly where he wanted it, from distances that would make most people squint. He served in an overseas deployment in 1991, came back. By all external appearances, a veteran trying to build a civilian life. But the civilian life was falling apart. Muhammad converted to Islam in 1987, maybe looking for structure or community, probably finding both for a while. He married a woman named Mildred and had 3 children. Maybe seemed like the whole picture was coming together, basically the kind of family that looks normal from the outside. But by the late 1990s, Mildred had obtained a restraining order against him. I don't know the specific reasons. Maybe severe domestic disputes, probably a combination of things that had been building for years. And then she got full custody of the children. That's the moment, I think. Or at least that's when whatever was already inside John Allen Muhammad found a direction. He was obsessed with getting his children back, maybe to the point of irrationality, probably way past that point by the time things escalated. He unlawfully relocated them at one point and took them to Antigua in the Caribbean. I don't know how long he had them there. Basically, an act of desperation from a man who decided the legal system wasn't going to give him what he wanted. And that's where he found Lee Boyd Malvo. Malvo was born on February 18, 1985, in Kingston, Jamaica. His father, Leslie, was a mason. His mother, Una, was a seamstress. And they were never married. I mean, that's not the tragedy part. Plenty of children grow up fine without married parents. The tragedy is what came after. Una left Leslie when Lee was 5 years old, then moved constantly, Jamaica to Antigua to Florida, basically dragging her son from island to island and country to country while she chased work wherever she could find it. She left him with relatives sometimes for months, sometimes longer. By age 12, Malvo was living in a makeshift shack in Antigua with no electricity and no running water, probably no consistent adult supervision, basically surviving in the most stripped-down sense of the word. He was a good student when he had access to school. I mean, teachers remember him as bright and eager, probably the kind of kid who would have been fine if circumstances had been different. And then Una met Muhammad in Antigua around 1999, and this is where everything pivots. Muhammad attached himself to the boy almost immediately, maybe recognized something in him, probably understood instinctively what a teenager who'd been left without a stable foundation would respond to. He gave Malvo food, structure, attention, and something that felt like stability. He called himself the boy's father, enrolled him in school in Bellingham, Washington, with John Allen Muhammad listed as his parent on the paperwork. It worked because it was everything Malvo had never had. Then Muhammad started changing it. He isolated Malvo from his mother, I mean deliberately and systematically, basically pushing Una out while inserting himself as the only person who mattered. He put Malvo on a strict regimen, honey and crackers, maybe some fruit, basically the minimum required to keep someone functional while ensuring they're completely reliant on you for anything more. He controlled Malvo's exercise routine, his sleep schedule, who he was allowed to talk to. He made him watch The Matrix, over and over, maybe 100 times. I don't know if that number is exact, but multiple sources say it. Probably just enough repetition that the film's logic started feeling like reality. The chosen one, the simulation. The idea that normal rules don't apply to people who've been awakened to a higher truth. Muhammad told Malvo he was special, chosen by a higher power, that what they were doing together was destined and necessary. He took him into the foothills of Mount Baker in Washington and subjected him to extreme endurance drills for hours. I mean, literally isolated him in the wilderness to test his limits and left him there until he came back, maybe to break down the last of his independent judgment. Probably because soldiers need to trust their commanders even in terrible conditions, and that's how Muhammad thought about this, as a military operation. He had Malvo practice with their equipment, real practice, positioning, breathing, operational discipline, patience. The same skills Muhammad had been drilling for 20 years in the army, now transferred to a teenager who believed the man teaching him was his father, and that God had personally selected them for something important. By the time they moved to the East Coast in 2002, Malvo was 17 years old and had been inside this system for almost 3 years. I don't know at what point the old Lee Malvo, the bright kid who won a 100-meter race at his school in Antigua, disappeared completely, but witnesses from that period say something unmistakable. In Muhammad's presence, Malvo never spoke unless spoken to, never took his eyes off the man, went completely silent the moment Muhammad entered a room. He'd changed his name to John after Muhammad's first name, hidden his Jamaican accent, called Muhammad his father in every context, I mean completely, and Muhammad had a plan. The plan, as far as investigators were ever able to reconstruct it, had several layers, maybe not all of them logical, probably shaped by years of obsessive thinking that had lost its connection to reality. He wanted to create chaos, a long-sustained campaign of random violence that would terrorize the Washington, D.C. area, because that's where Mildred lived, where his children lived. He wanted to kill Mildred in the middle of the chaos and have it look like just another random victim, basically use the random murders as cover for the one murder he actually wanted. Then the extortion. He'd demand $10 million from the U.S. government to stop, and he'd use that money to establish a compound in Canada where he'd train 140 homeless black children as a kind of army, maybe a new society, probably something that made complete sense inside his own head. He'd converted the back seat of a 1990 blue Chevrolet Caprice into a prone tactical position, cut a hole in the trunk small, precise, just large enough for a specialized equipment. From the outside, it looked like every other old blue Caprice on the road. From the inside, it was a rolling mobile platform. He had his primary equipment. He had Malvo. He had the plan. October 2nd, 2002, just after 5 p.m., a projectile came through the window of a craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland, and missed a cashier by inches. Maybe a warm-up, probably just calibration. 45 minutes later, James Martin was crossing a parking lot in Wheaton. He didn't make it. So here's what law enforcement is dealing with on October 4th, 2002, maybe 36 hours after the first incident, probably while the entire D.C. metro area is still trying to understand what it's looking at. 5 lives lost in less than 16 hours. No witnesses who saw an assailant. No physical traces at the scenes because the impacts came from distance. I mean serious distance, probably 200 meters or more in some cases. Basically the kind of range that means by the time anyone realized what happened, whoever was responsible had already moved. Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose is standing in front of cameras trying to project calm, while privately, probably understanding that this is unlike anything his department has encountered. The task force forms fast. Montgomery County Police, Prince George's County, D.C. Metro, FBI, ATF, maybe Secret Service eventually because the White House is 5 miles from some of these crime scenes. Basically every agency with jurisdiction over any part of the D.C. area suddenly trying to coordinate on a case where nobody has anything solid. And here's the problem that nobody talks about enough. They were looking for the wrong thing. Profilers told investigators to look for a white male, probably working alone, maybe driving a white van. This is the standard profile for a long-distance threat in an American suburb. The data said white male. The witnesses who thought they'd seen something said white van, and so that's what the roadblocks checked for, and that's what the tips focused on. Every white van in the D.C. area got pulled over at some point during those 3 weeks. Probably thousands of stops. Basically an enormous expenditure of resources aimed at the wrong vehicle and the wrong person. The blue Caprice drove through those roadblocks. Maybe slowed down, probably looked completely ordinary. Basically an old American sedan that matched nothing anyone was searching for. Meanwhile, the incidents continued. October 3rd was the worst single day. 5 tragic losses before 10 a.m. James Buchanan mowing a lawn in Rockville. Primkumar whale car pumping gas at a Shell station in Aspen Hill. Sarah Ramos sitting outside a post office in Silver Spring. Lori Lewis Rivera vacuuming her van at a gas station in Kensington. Pascal Charlotte standing on a street corner in Washington, D.C. By noon, the city had basically stopped functioning. I mean, gas stations were empty, parking lots deserted, people calling out sick from jobs they could normally walk to because walking outside felt like a lottery nobody wanted to enter. The randomness was the threat, not the equipment, not the caprice, not Muhammad's precision, the randomness. Because you can protect yourself from a lot of things, but you cannot protect yourself from a projectile you don't know is coming while you're doing something you do every day, pumping gas, mowing a lawn, reading outside. The normalcy of the victim's activities was the point. I mean, Muhammad understood something about fear that most people don't. Probably from military training, basically, that chaos is most effective when it makes ordinary life feel dangerous. Schools went to lockdown procedures, maybe the first time most of these suburban districts had ever done it. Probably chaotic because nobody had protocols for this specific situation. Outdoor recess was canceled. Parents lined up at pickup time and watched the tree lines. A 13-year-old boy named Aaron Brown was critically injured while being dropped off at his middle school in Bowie. Maryland on October 7th survived but barely, basically proving that the schools weren't safe either. The assailants left a tarot card at the scene of Iran Brown's incident. Agency tracking them, which is already dramatic enough. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. Written on the card in Muhammad's handwriting, "Dear policeman, I am the ultimate power. I am the ultimate power." And then a phone number at the bottom. Police called it. Got a message, Muhammad's voice recorded, demanding they acknowledge a connection to a robbery in Montgomery, Alabama. Investigators flew to Alabama, found the scene, found a fingerprint. The fingerprint belonged to Lee Boyd Malvo, 17 years old, on file with Immigration Services from a 2001 arrest in Washington State. And Malvo's arrest record mentioned a man he'd been traveling with, John Allen Muhammad. Now they had names. Now they had a vehicle description. Muhammad had registered a blue Chevy Caprice in New Jersey. Now they had the right picture. But they still didn't have them. The incidents kept coming. October 9th, a man named Dean Harold Myers at a gas station in Manassas, Virginia. October 11th, Kenneth Bridges at another gas station in Fredericksburg. October 14th, FBI analyst Linda Franklin in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Falls Church. Maybe the most symbolically devastating loss of the whole spree, probably because she worked for the agency tracking them, and it didn't matter. October 19th, a man struck and injured outside a restaurant in Ashland, Virginia. October 22nd, bus driver Conrad Johnson struck on the steps of his bus in Aspen Hill. 10 lives lost, 3 critically injured. 23 days. And Muhammad kept calling. Called a priest in Ashland, Virginia for reasons nobody fully understood. Maybe he wanted to negotiate. Probably he wanted to feel important, basically giving investigators information while simultaneously taunting them. He left another message demanding $10 million wired to a bank account. I don't know if he genuinely thought that was going to happen. Maybe he did. Probably by this point his grip on reality had loosened enough that the plan still made sense to him. What he didn't know, what neither he nor Malvo knew, was that while they were leaving messages and moving between locations, the net was closing. The Caprice registration, Malvo's fingerprint. The phone calls traced to specific payphones at specific times. Investigators were building a picture piece by piece, maybe slower than anyone wanted. Probably agonizingly slow for the families of those lost, but building. October 22nd, a motorist called the tip line after hearing a description of the Caprice on the radio. Said he'd seen a blue Chevy matching that description parked at a rest stop off Interstate 70 near Myersville, Maryland. Maybe thought nothing of it at first, probably almost didn't call. Basically made the call that ended everything. Law enforcement descended on that rest stop at 3:19 in the morning on October 24, 2002. Maryland State Police, Montgomery County SWAT, FBI's hostage rescue team, probably more agencies than you could count. Basically everyone who'd been working this case for 23 days, converging on a rest stop in Frederick County. Inside the blue Caprice, John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo were asleep. Malvo was supposed to be keeping watch. He'd fallen asleep. They were taken into custody without a struggle. I mean, just woke up to tactical lights and tactical equipment, focused on them, and it was over. Probably the most anticlimactic ending to 23 days of chaos that anyone could have imagined. In the trunk, the primary hardware, the hole cut for the device, the mattress for lying prone. On a laptop found in the car, maps with icons marking every incident location, getaway routes, basically a documented record of what they'd done. The most powerful city in the world had been paralyzed for 3 weeks by 2 people sleeping in a caprice at a rest stop. So the trials may be the strangest part of this whole story, probably because what happened in those courtrooms didn't resolve anything the way trials are supposed to, basically just raised new questions while answering the obvious ones. Mohammed went first. Virginia, November 2003, because Virginia had the ultimate legal penalty and the federal government wanted to use it. The prosecution brought in over 130 witnesses, maybe 400 pieces of physical evidence, basically the laptop with the maps and the icons on every incident location, the hardware found in the trunk, the forensics connecting their equipment to 10 tragic losses. Mohammed represented himself at certain points. I don't know why exactly. Maybe he thought he could control what the jury heard. Probably just couldn't let go of the sense of control that had defined those 23 days. It didn't help. He was convicted of the most severe charges, received the ultimate sentence. On November 10, 2009, Virginia carried out the final sentence against John Allen Mohammed through standard state protocols. His last meal was chicken with red sauce and cake. I don't know why that detail stays with me, maybe because it's so ordinary. Basically, a man who spent years believing he was God eating chicken and cake before facing his final consequence. Malvo's trial was different. I mean genuinely different in ways that made it harder to watch, even for people who had no sympathy for what he'd done. He was 17 during the incidents. His defense team argued insanity, not casually, not as a legal Hail Mary, but with psychiatric evidence that was, I don't know how else to put it, actually compelling. A psychologist named Dewey Cornell interviewed Malvo more than 20 times after his arrest, maybe watching Muhammad's influence dissolve in real time over those months, probably documenting something he'd never seen quite so clearly before. Cornell described watching Malvo transform, gradually becoming more communicative, starting to smile with his guards, making jokes, basically becoming recognizable as the kid that teachers in Antigua and Bellingham remembered bright, eager, friendly. The psychologist testified that Malvo had been diagnosed with a dissociative disorder. I mean a genuine clinical diagnosis, probably one of the most credible brainwashing cases in American legal history, according to some experts. And here's the thing that gets me. At some point during those interviews, Malvo asked Cornell something, maybe in a quiet moment, probably when he was starting to understand how completely he'd been used. He asked, "If I was doing right, why did a higher power let it stop?" I don't know what to do with that question. I've sat with it, and I still don't. The jury convicted him anyway, maybe because 10 people were lost, and no psychological argument was going to change that. Probably because Virginia in 2003 wasn't equipped to separate the events from the circumstances that produced them. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, then 6 consecutive life sentences in Maryland on top of that, then years of additional legal proceedings about whether mandatory life sentences for juvenile offenders violated the Constitution. As of 2026, Lee Boyd Malvo is in his early 40s. He married a woman named Sable Knapp in a civil ceremony at Red Onion State Prison in Virginia in 2020. Basically a low-key courthouse marriage in a maximum security facility. He's written letters of apology to survivors. I don't know if any of them were read or accepted, or if it matters. Probably not the point anyway. He's been doing educational programs, maybe taking courses, basically trying to fill time in a way that doesn't make the walls close in completely. Muhammad's ex-wife Mildred, the woman the whole plan was built around, the one whose tragic end was supposed to be hidden inside 10 random casualties, survived everything, raised her children, watched the final legal conclusion in 2009. I don't know what that felt like. Maybe nothing clean or resolved, probably just another thing to carry. And then there are the 10 people who didn't survive. James Martin, James Buchanan, Premkumar Whalekar, Sarah Ramos, Lori Lewis Rivera, Pascal Charlotte, Dean Harold Myers, Kenneth Bridges, Linda Franklin, Conrad Johnson. People pumping gas and mowing lawns and reading outside and going to work and standing on a corner, doing ordinary things on ordinary days. And then they weren't. What I keep coming back to, what I can't resolve, isn't the legal question. I mean, that got answered. It's the question of what made Lee Boyd Malvo possible. A 15-year-old living in a shack in Antigua with no electricity, no father, a mother who kept leaving, a kid who needed one thing, someone to tell him he mattered, and the person who told him that happened to be John Allen Muhammad, who needed an instrument more than he needed a son. Does that excuse what Malvo did? No. I don't think it does, probably couldn't even if I wanted to. 10 people are still lost. Their families still carry that weight every day. But it means something. Maybe it means we should pay attention to the Lee Malvos before they find the John Muhammads. Maybe it means the systems that were supposed to catch a 15-year-old immigrant in crisis, the immigration office in Bellingham, the school that enrolled him without asking harder questions, the bond hearing that released him back into Muhammad's custody, failed in ways that cost 10 people their futures and wrecked one more in the process. The Blue Caprice is in a law enforcement museum now. The hole in the trunk is still there. 3 weeks of chaos, and it fits behind glass with a placard. Drop an eye emoji in the comments. I want to know who made it this far tonight. And if this one left you with that particular feeling, the one where you understand exactly what happened, but still can't make it make sense, stay with me. Because next we're going somewhere different. A man with a clean house, a good job, a wife and kids, a concealed nightmare in the back of a semi-truck, driving America's highways for 15 years. Nobody knew. That one's next. Second case is starting. To understand what Robert William Fisher did on the night of April 9th, 2001, you have to go back to 1976, maybe to a house in Tucson, Arizona, probably to the moment a 15-year-old boy watched his family split in half and decided, on some level he maybe couldn't articulate, that he was never going to let that happen to him. His parents' divorce hit him in a way that never healed. I mean genuinely never. Basically, a wound that he carried into every job and every relationship and every argument with his wife for the next 25 years. Friends from high school remembered him as very bitter about it. I don't know exactly what that looked like day to day. Probably a quietness that occasionally broke into something harder. Basically, a kid who decided the world owed him something it kept failing to deliver. He joined the Navy, tried to become a SEAL. I mean, really tried. Probably trained hard. Maybe thought that was the thing that would prove something to himself or to his father or to the mother who'd left. He didn't make it. That failure, and I don't know how big it felt to him internally, probably enormous, basically the first in a series of things Robert Fisher attempted and couldn't finish, followed him out of the military and into civilian life. He became a firefighter in California. That worked for a while, maybe gave him the sense of competence and structure he was looking for, probably made him feel like he belonged to something that mattered. Then he suffered a severe physical setback with his back. I don't know the exact circumstances, maybe on the job, probably serious enough that it ended his career. He was forced to retire. Another thing taken away. He moved to Arizona and reinvented himself in medicine, maybe because it was steady work, probably because a surgical technician at the Mayo Clinic sounded like someone who had his life together. He was good at it. Apparently co-workers described him as capable, professional, just a normal guy, according to one of them. He knew how to present the right face to the right people. Basically had spent his whole life learning which version of himself to show in which room. In 1987, he met Mary Cooper at a Baptist church social in Scottsdale. They got married. And here's where the two versions of Robert Fisher start to diverge. I mean the version he showed the world and the version Mary lived with every day. To co-workers, he talked about his family with warmth, maybe even pride, probably the kind of guy who kept photos on his desk and mentioned his kids' sports games. But at home, and this comes from Mary's own accounts, from neighbors, from family members, it was something else entirely. He was controlling in ways that went past strict, maybe past even what you'd call traditional, basically into something that made the house feel like a place with rules nobody had agreed to. Mary was not allowed to decorate their home, not allowed to hang pictures on the walls except the ones Robert approved. Every detail of their lives, finances, schedules, how the house looked, how the children behaved ran through him first, probably because control was the only thing that made him feel safe. Maybe because the divorce at 15 had taught him that things fall apart when you're not watching. He argued with Mary constantly. I don't know about every subject, but money and intimacy come up in every account, basically two areas where he felt she wasn't giving him what he was owed. Neighbors could hear them having intense vocal disputes from outside the house. He snapped at Brittany and Bobby over the smallest things, maybe yelled at them for leaving something in the wrong place, probably described by people who knew the family as awkward with his own children, like he loved the idea of being a father more than he knew how to actually do it. And then there was the affair. At some point during the marriage, I don't know exactly when, probably while things were already bad, Robert faced an undeniable consequence and had to confess to Mary that he'd been unfaithful. She kicked him out. He went to the woods, maybe to his favorite wilderness areas in the high desert north of Scottsdale, probably the only place he'd ever felt completely in control of his environment. He told friends later that during those days alone in the wilderness, he thought about not coming back. Actually considered disappearing completely. Basically sat out there in the trees weighing whether there was any reason to go home. He came back. They went to counseling at Scottsdale Baptist Church. Their pastor, Greg Cantelmo, worked with them on the marriage. I don't know what those sessions looked like. Probably Robert presenting the version of himself that wanted to fix things while Mary tried to describe what was actually happening at home. The counseling continued, maybe for months, probably as long as Mary was willing to keep trying. But Mary had started planning. She'd taken a job that she told friends was her security fund. I don't know if she used that exact phrase or if that's how people remember it, but the meaning is clear. She was saving money, building a way out. The job itself, the separate account. Maybe the conversations she was having with people outside the marriage. Robert either knew or suspected. Probably both basically sensed that the thing he'd spent his entire adult life trying to prevent was coming for him anyway. The night before the explosion, April 9th, the family went together to an outdoor survival class. Maybe because Robert had signed them up for it? Probably a normal Tuesday evening activity for a family where the father was an avid outdoorsman. Afterward, while Mary took the kids home, Robert stopped at stores nearby a Walmart, maybe another shop, buying camping supplies. I don't know exactly what he purchased. Probably things he'd need for what came after. He went home. He waited for his family to fall asleep. And then, sometime in the night of April 9th, Robert William Fisher did what he'd decided he was going to do rather than let his marriage end the way his parents. Marriage had ended. He went to Mary first. She was in bed. He committed an unthinkable and final act against her. Then he went to Brittany's room. She was 12 years old. Then Bobby's room. Bobby was 10. When the unthinkable acts were finished, the house was deliberately compromised. Forensic teams later determined that the environment had been methodically rigged to trigger a catastrophic thermal event hours after his departure, ensuring total devastation of the scene, probably to make sure the fire destroyed whatever evidence might have survived. He put the family dog, Blue, in Mary's Toyota 4Runner, and he drove north into the dark toward Tonto National Forest, 100 miles away, while behind him his family was still in their beds and a candle was burning down somewhere in the house. So April 10th, 2001, 8:42 in the morning, Scottsdale, Arizona. A house on 74th Place explodes. I mean really explodes. Not a small fire or a gas leak smell that neighbors call in before anything happens, but a full devastation that rocks the street and sends a fireball up into the desert morning sky. Neighbors come outside, probably thinking car accident or something industrial, basically not expecting a residential house to just detonate on a Tuesday morning in a quiet suburb. Firefighters go in when the flames are manageable, and they find them in the beds. Mary, 38 years old. Brittany, 12. Bobby, 10. All three in their rooms, basically where Robert had left them hours earlier. Burned now, but still there, still in the positions they'd been in when they went to sleep the night before. Medical examiner's office gets called, and here's where the story stops being a tragic accident and becomes something else. I mean something that shifts everything, probably the moment investigators understand what they're actually looking at. The individuals show evidence that a gas explosion doesn't cause. Mary had sustained an unthinkable and fatal trauma prior to the fire. The children had faced the same tragic end. I don't know how long it took the medical examiner to establish this. Maybe hours? Probably the kind of findings that make experienced forensic professionals go quiet for a moment before they start writing their reports. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate tragedy that someone tried to destroy with fire. Investigators called the Mayo Clinic. Robert Fisher, surgical technician scheduled to work that morning, didn't show up. Nobody called in sick on his behalf. Nobody knew where he was. 4 days pass. No Robert Fisher. One of his secured items is missing from the home. Some of his personal camping gear is gone. His cell phone turned off the night before the explosion, and I mean the night before, probably while he was still driving north, never turns back on. His bank account, which he'd visited at an ATM the day before the explosion, is never touched again. Not once. On April 14th, Arizona Department of Public Safety issues a statewide bulletin. Find Robert William Fisher and arrest him. On April 20th, a camper in Tonto National Forest calls in a tip. Mary's Toyota 4Runner is parked deep in the woods near Young, Arizona, maybe 100 miles northeast of Scottsdale, probably as far into the wilderness as you can get on a paved road before the terrain becomes something else entirely. The car has been wiped clean, I mean thoroughly. Basically no fingerprints, no useful trace evidence. The family dog Blue is outside the vehicle, guarding it, maybe sitting there waiting for someone to come back, probably the most heartbreaking detail in this entire case. Robert Fisher is nowhere. Search teams go in. I don't know how many people exactly, maybe dozens of officers and volunteers, probably search and rescue units with dogs and helicopter support. The terrain around Young is rough, dense pine forest, cave systems, ravines, early spring snow still on the ground at elevation. They search for 3 days and find nothing. No footprints leading away from the vehicle. No campfire. No trace of him, nothing. And here's the thing that makes this case so strange, maybe what makes it different from most fugitive cases, probably why it stayed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for nearly 20 years. Robert Fisher was genuinely, professionally prepared for exactly this scenario. He'd been exploring that wilderness since he moved to Arizona. He knew the terrain, really knew it. Not casually, but the way someone knows a place they've been going for years. He was physically capable, 6'1", 190 pounds, trained as a firefighter and military veteran, comfortable sleeping outdoors for extended periods. He also had a stiff gait from his back condition, a gold crown on an upper left canine tooth, distinctive medical marks on his lower back. Identifying features, real ones, the kind that investigators could use to narrow down a sighting. But sightings were almost entirely useless. A tense interaction with tourists in Guatemala in 2009 didn't pan out. A law enforcement search on a Colorado home in 2014, wrong person. A man in Canada in 2004 who had the same build, same back scar, same gap where a gold tooth should be. Close enough that they detained him and processed him, but the fingerprints didn't match. Hundreds of tips, probably thousands over 20 years, all of them either inconclusive or false. In June 2002, the FBI put Robert Fisher on their 10 most wanted list, the 475th person ever added. His face went on post office walls, on television, on America's Most Wanted and national investigative programs, basically every platform available for finding fugitives. $100,000 reward. FBI age enhancement software producing images of what he might look like at 50, at 60, at 65. The profile that investigators built over the years described someone who, if alive, would probably be living small, a rural area, maybe working for cash as a handyman, probably avoiding paperwork and bureaucracy, and anything that required showing ID. He was religious before the tragic events, deeply involved in his Baptist church. I don't know if that version of Robert Fisher survived what he did, probably not, but maybe some version of the discipline and structure he found in religion transferred to staying hidden. Scottsdale detective John Heinzelman, who'd been assigned to the case since 2014, described getting tips on a weekly, if not daily basis, as recently as 2021. He and FBI agent Taylor Hanna kept working it, kept following leads, kept coming up empty. November 3rd, 2021. The FBI removed Robert Fisher from the 10 most wanted list. Not because he was found, I mean not because the case was solved, but because, and this is the exact language they used, the extensive publicity Fisher's case received during its nearly 20 years on the list has not resulted in his successful location and or capture. The case no longer fulfills that requirement. 20 years of publicity, 20 years of tips, 20 years of age-enhanced photos and reward offers and television segments. And he's just gone. He remains a wanted fugitive. The charges are still active. The reward is still offered. If Robert William Fisher is alive, he's 63 years old now, probably looks nothing like the man in those family photos from the late 1990s. Maybe has been living under a different name in a place where nobody asks too many questions for over 2 decades. If he's alive. So here's the question that's been sitting at the center of this case for 23 years. Maybe the most important question, and definitely the one nobody can answer. Probably the thing that makes this case different from most fugitive stories where investigators at least have a theory they're confident in. Is Robert William Fisher gone or alive? And I mean genuinely, I don't know. Probably the people who worked this case for years don't know either. Basically 2 camps inside law enforcement itself that can't agree and haven't agreed since 2001. Detective Heinzelman said it plainly. Some investigators believe he met his end in Tonto National Forest in the days after the explosion. Maybe by choice, probably because a man who'd just done what Robert Fisher did and then driven alone into the wilderness in the middle of the night wasn't necessarily driving toward a future. Others believe he's out there somewhere, maybe in a small town in a state nobody's thought to look, probably working cash jobs and staying invisible the way a methodical, disciplined person who planned a gas line devastation down to the timing of a candle could theoretically stay invisible for decades. The theory that he didn't survive has real weight. I mean, it's not just the easy explanation, probably the one you'd lean toward if you sat with what Robert Fisher said to friends years before the tragic events, that when Mary kicked him out after the affair, he'd gone to the woods and thought about not coming back. Not casually, specifically. He'd gone to his favorite wilderness, sat with it, and then decided to go home. And here's what's different about April 2001. He didn't have a home to go back to anymore. I mean, he'd just made sure of that, basically eliminated the only thing that had ever made the return trip worth taking. The terrain around Young, Arizona is legitimately brutal, maybe beautiful, and the way that high desert pine forest is beautiful, but remote in ways that people who've only seen it from a map don't fully understand. Cave systems, ravines, spring snowpack, still on the ground at elevation in April. Basically the kind of place where someone who went in determined not to be found could achieve exactly that. Search teams spent 3 days covering the area after Mary's Forerunner was located. I don't know how much ground they could actually cover in that terrain in that time. Probably not enough, maybe not even close to enough. But here's the thing about the alive theory. I mean the part that keeps it alive as a theory, rather than wishful thinking on the FBI's part. Robert Fisher was not an impulsive man, probably the opposite of impulsive. Basically someone whose entire life after his parents' divorce had been organized around maintaining control over everything he could control. The scene meticulously altered. The methodical delay engineered to ensure maximum destruction before any response could arrive. The car wiped clean, I mean thoroughly clean, not panicked and left clean, but deliberately clean. Basically the work of someone who is thinking several steps ahead, even while doing something catastrophic. Someone capable of that level of planning while under that level of emotional pressure may be capable of walking out the other side of a mountain range with whatever cash he'd taken from the ATM the day before, probably capable of becoming someone else in a country where, if you're disciplined enough about it, you can still fall through the cracks and stay there. Investigators described the profile of a surviving Robert Fisher as someone living rural, maybe a handyman or day laborer, probably paid in cash, basically in a community small enough that nobody looks. Too hard at a quiet man who keeps to himself and doesn't socialize much. His bank account has never been touched. Not once in 23 years, I mean not a single withdrawal or deposit. Basically zero activity since the ATM visit the day before the explosion. His cell phone was turned off the night before the explosion and has never been switched on again. There are no hits on his Social Security number, no medical records under his name, no tax filings, nothing. I don't know if that means he's gone or just extraordinarily careful. Probably both possibilities are real. The sightings were almost all useless. Maybe not their fault. Probably just the reality of circulating a photograph for 20 years and having thousands of people see faces that don't quite match. Guatemala in 2009 didn't pan out. Colorado in 2014, wrong person. Canada in 2004, and here's the one that gets investigators. I mean the one that still comes up because it was so close a man with the same build, same back mark from the past procedure, same gap where a gold tooth should be. Basically everything except the fingerprints matched. The fingerprints didn't match. He walked. November 3rd, 2021. The FBI took Robert Fisher off the 10 most wanted list. Maybe quietly, probably with a statement about how 20 years of publicity hadn't produced results, and that Cogley case no longer met the criteria for inclusion. They were careful to say he remains a wanted fugitive. I mean the charges are still active. The reward is still $100,000. Basically, the case is still open, and they still want to find him. But the list has limited space and limited resources, and Robert Fisher had occupied a spot for nearly 2 decades, without anyone finding him. And here's what I keep coming back to, probably the detail that makes this story different from a typical fugitive case. The thing that doesn't let me file it away neatly. Robert Fisher didn't run because he wanted to escape. I mean, that's not quite right. Probably not the accurate framing. He ran because the thing he'd built his entire adult life around, keeping his family together, not becoming his parents, not letting his children go through what he'd gone through at 15 in Tucson, was already gone. He'd destroyed it himself. And whatever came after that, whether it was a final decision in the forest or a cash job in a rural town or hidden traces somewhere on a mountain nobody searched, it was never going to be a life Robert Fisher recognized as his. Mary was 38 years old. Brittany was 12. Bobby was 10. They were in their beds. If you're somewhere dark right now, somewhere quiet, maybe letting this one settle before you sleep. Just stay there for a moment. Some stories end in courtrooms, with sentences and appeals and the slow machinery of justice doing what it's supposed to do. This one ends on a mountain road in Arizona, a dog sitting next to a parked car, and a man who walked into the trees and never came back out. Or didn't. Sleep well tonight.